Twisted Sound Underground podcast. I am your host, James Marzalek, and I'm here with Daniella Mestyanek Young. How are you, Daniella?
I'm wonderful.
That's fantastic. Daniella is an author, a TEDx speaker, a combat veteran, and culture hacker. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I'm really excited about the conversation, to be able to share your story and what you're doing. Let's dive right into it. You have a very, very interesting backstory. I'd like you to bring us through your timeline. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? And let's go from there.
All right, yeah. So I was born in the Philippines, in Manila, to a 15-year-old mother.
Wow.
And I was born in a super crazy religious cult called the Children of God.
Yeah.
Which is an organization, that started off in the late 60s when all of the, what was going on culturally at that time was the hippie movement, right? People were starting to question what they'd always been taught, looking for something new. And so this sort of previously failed preacher decided to go start preaching to the hippies, love, faith in Jesus.
Right.
And got, crazy amounts of people to follow him, right? So I want to say by 1977, so from 69 to 77, he had 100,000 people.
Whoa.
Living in communes all over the world.
Wow.
Yeah, crazy startup curve.
No kidding.
And following, believing with every core of their being that he was the end-time prophet of God. They were the end-time army of God, preparing for the end of the world.
Right.
And it sort of slowly devolved into, one of the largest organizations in the world to promote religious prostitution.
Right.
A lot of different, pedophilia and incest and child marriages.
Right.
And, of course, this constant, apocalyptic
Right.
ideas about the end of the world.
Yep.
And so I was multiple generations of my family into that.
Wow.
My great-grandmother donated one of the first ranch properties in Texas for this man, David Berg, to kind of create his initial communes. And then her daughter joined. My grandfather is still the senior accountant for the organization, which mostly just exists online these days.
Right.
And then my mother, of course, was born and raised in it, was in till she was almost 40.
Wow.
Just pretty much having babies from the time she was 14.
Jeez.
And so that was where I, started, grew up, went from the Philippines, a commune in the Philippines, to a commune in Japan, to a commune in Peru.
Oh, wow.
To a commune in Brazil.
You jumped around to different chapters, so to speak. Yeah.
So we sort of moved base to base, almost like very similar to the military, if you're familiar.
Right.
Somebody actually asked me once if the Children of God or the family did moves like the military. And I was kind of actually, yes.
Yeah, right.
And the whole organization was actually structured in this very militaristic fashion.
Right.
And what I describe about our lives kind of growing up was, first of all, you don't know anything different.
Right.
So it's really interesting to explain, and we'll talk a lot about socialization and culture later on.
You're almost cut off from the outside world completely, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Even though we would still go out into the outside world, right?
Yeah.
So we lived in these communes.
Right.
But then the children would be trotted out to kind of beg on the streets, raise money, do charity work, you know, this front as a big missionary organization. And which a lot of it was legitimately happening, right? Legitimate charity work, legitimate kind of missionary stuff. But it's possible to be totally isolated within an ideology.
Totally.
And it was basically us versus them, right? It was, we are, the 10,000 people strong, God's end-time army.
Yep.
Everybody else is wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So everyone on the outside is a systemite.
Sounds like most religion.
They are evil.
Right.
Yeah, and it exactly sounds like a lot of different religions, right? And I mean, to your point, and we'll get to this, but the extreme examples and extreme life stories give you insights into what everyone else's experience is.
Absolutely.
Just not often as extreme.
Sure.
And so, I kind of described like the process of brainwashing is very, mental programming. It's a very real thing.
Yeah.
Sci-fi does us no favors when
Yeah.
we think that brainwashed people are automatons.
Right.
Because, what it ended up in our world was, I could read at the age of 3, like we could quote the Bible, like we were super well behaved, super seemingly intelligent,
Right.
even though we were essentially kept out of school to prepare ourselves to be martyrs for, the Antichrist and the end time.
Yeah.
But in reality, our lives were, I describe it as no spontaneous moments of joy, just institutionalized world where you were standing in lines. You didn't, live with your kind of like nuclear family.
Yeah.
You didn't have anyone in your corner,
Yeah.
and so it's like, physical abuse, sexual abuse, abuse by religion, all of that stuff was going on in definitely various degrees at various times in kind of the span of this 50-year organization. But, it really boils down to, like, when you look at it as an organization, it's like the children that were born and raised in the children of God had no childhoods, like their childhoods were stolen from them.
Well, and that's something I was kind of curious about is when you're raised in that ideology, there is nothing else. It's only that. I mean, do you remember one of your first moments of that life? I mean, what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, and it is exactly what you said, right? Like there is nothing else, but like we were very aware that we were like unique and special and all of that. So I do remember a moment, when I was about 6 that I kind of realized like, we're not normal, like, and a lot of the children have described it this way, it's like you would see these kids playing outside and you would be like,
what are they doing?
They seem happy, like
Right.
they seem like nice people, when the first time I came to America, we'll talk about that more, but I was 14 and it was, we were told like Babylon the whore, like America is evil,
of course.
Homosexuality and Hollywood and all of that. And when I got here, I was like,
none of that's here.
Americans are super Christian. Like that was really weird for me. That was really a shock.
Yeah.
And, looking back, I don't think I ever believed any of the ideology. And so I was in trouble a lot. I was questioning a lot. Like I always had that. But there wasn't, like, to your point, there wasn't an option to just be like, hey, I don't believe in God.
Right.
That just was not an option. And that's kind of when you're multi-generation in a religion like that is kind of what is the effect of that. It's like it's almost like you and I have both been in the military. And so, like, when you're in the military, that becomes all-consuming.
That's right.
But you had a life before you were in the military.
That's right.
And for cult kids, like,
That
is
nothing.
all you know.
Yeah.
That is all you know.
Well, and it's almost related. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into the military and deployment piece of it later, but I view my time in Iraq like that as well. Like I saw that firsthand, where you saw people that you could tell from birth they were raised to kill. They were raised to kill infidels. That's all that they knew, and they trained for thousands of years, raising their children on how to do that. Very, very similar type of mentality where that's literally inside these 4 walls. That's all that exists.
Yeah,
it's insane.
And it's even, so same thing what you were mentioning, like when I was in Afghanistan, I actually kind of worked pretty hard as the intelligence officer to be like, if you just hate them, you can't understand them.
Yeah, right, right.
Try and understand if your whole life, like try to understand if you grew up in the most war-torn country in the history of the world. Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires. And their children have been getting killed for all of history. So, of course, they have a different relationship.
And there was zero training from the military about that either. I mean, we got trained very briefly on how to speak Arabic, but it was mostly put your gun down or I'll shoot, or show me your identification, right? There was no real cultural training on what we were stepping into. All we knew is they were the enemy. We have a mission to complete. Go execute, right? Crazy.
Exactly.
Crazy.
Exactly. Yeah, and so let me tell you and so I then spent, the majority of my childhood growing up in Brazil. And yes, I do speak Portuguese and Spanish.
Nice.
But then we moved to the U.S. and we came to the U.S. in 2001.
Okay.
So, my biggest, and I'm growing up my whole life as like, I'm an American.
Right.
But my biggest culture shock ever was coming to America, landing in LAX.
Oh, geez.
And just being like, oh my God, there are so many different kinds of people here. I remember being like, it's so loud because everyone's speaking English.
Right.
And your second language, you can kind of turn it off.
Yeah.
But your first language, like, it just invades from everywhere. And so it was very, like, interesting and different. And then two things happened for me that year, and I was 14.
Yeah. What year was this?
2001.
Okay. Yeah.
And so literally in South America and in Asia and in a lot of these third world countries where the cult had their communes for a reason, you have very large properties surrounded by like 18-foot cement walls, literally topped with broken glass.
Compounds. Yeah.
And exactly, compounds. And that is how rich people live over there. Yeah. And so it would literally be like super multimillionaire would just donate his resort home to us and we would go live with 200 people.
Jeez. Yeah.
And so, but then we come to San Diego and, you don't have that anymore. Yeah. So we had, I want to say 18 or 22 people living in like a 3-bedroom apartment. Whoa. And then eventually in a single family home.
Yeah.
But it's like you can't, kids can't be begging out on the streets at all hour. Right. You can't just like awkwardly not be in school. Yep. Americans ask a lot of questions.
That's right.
It's much harder to have like a functioning cult commune in the cul-de-sac,
Right.
And so literally like the walls came down, right? And I started to interact with the outside world in a much more regular way. And I started to actually see that, like I said, Americans are not evil.
Right.
The police are not out to come destroy our way of life.
Right.
Like they are here to protect.
Was 2001 when you had that light bulb moment that said, hey, maybe this isn't what it was? Or did you have that moment before 2001?
Yes. So I think it started happening in 2001. I mean, it started happening for me very, very young.
Sure.
At 6 years old.
Questioning everything.
Dealing with some pretty bad abuse.
Right.
And I was like, this is... Like, we were being taught that sex with children is God's love.
Right.
And I was like, if this is God's love, I'm cool with hell,
Yep.
Yep. So I do think, like I said, it never, for many reasons, the brainwashing didn't really work on me.
Right.
To the extent that other people, I mean, my mom stayed in it for 40 years.
Jeez. Yeah.
But on 9/11... is kind of my light bulb moment, what I describe as the crack in the brainwashing. Mm-hmm. So first of all, on 9/11, this was the first time I'd ever seen live news on TV.
Oh, wow.
Like, I remember I couldn't really comprehend what live news was.
Right.
I kept thinking it was some kind of movie.
Sure.
And then once I got it, my experience as, on the one hand, as American, the other hand, a, Children of God member, was you were probably surrounded on 9/11 by crying, very upset Americans. Mm-hmm. I was surrounded by people rejoicing.
Wow.
And I, kind of described this in the article that I published in Narratively. Yeah. And it was, still shocked and stunned, but very much like, this is it. This is God's punishment. This is what our prophet has always promised. Wow. I remember thinking, is this the beginning of the end time? Like, is the Antichrist about to announce? And then, so again, walls come down, outside world comes in with television, and I'm hearing these terms, terrorists, religious extremists. Mm-hmm. And I kind of had this realization, I couldn't have described it this way at the time, but that, I think we're extremists.
They're talking about us.
Also, yeah.
Ooh. That's a big light bulb.
And that was when I kind of like really made the decision that I needed to get away. Yeah. And so later that year we moved on to Mexico, and I sort of spent the next year and a half just kind of launching a
Right.
teenage rebellion.
Nice.
To get myself out of there.
Right.
Get myself essentially excommunicated.
Yep.
People like to split hairs of whether I was excommunicated or
course.
not,
Yeah,
but
right.
I just say that at 15 I escaped
Yeah.
that life.
Yeah.
And I moved to America pretty much by myself.
Wow.
Moved to Texas, had an older stepsister that I'd met about 3 times, kind of sign for me.
Wow.
And started trying to go to high school, which was my giant rebellion, by the way, was wanting to go to high school.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like,
It's ironic. Most people want to get out of it, right?
yeah, exactly. And it was very ironic because I showed up, so I show up at my local school and I've got a passport and a social security card, and that is it.
And that's it.
Like,
Yeah.
no medical records, no shots,
Yeah,
nothing,
yeah.
no school records. I've never been to school a day in my life. I'm almost 16 at this point.
Wow.
And they say to me, we can't enroll you
Right.
because you don't exist. But now that we know you exist and we have like all your
Right.
information here, you need to come back and show us that you were enrolled somewhere in 5 days, or we have to call the cops because you're too young.
Wow.
And so it took, I had to really fight for it.
Yeah.
I had to go all the way up to the city admin level.
Yeah.
And literally beg,
Yeah.
these school authorities, like, look, I'm a 15-year-old kid that wants to go to school.
Seriously. This shouldn't be this
Please,
hard.
just let me go to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, ended up, it worked out. I did all 4 years of high school in 2 years.
Wow.
So ended up being able to sort of graduate with my peers.
Yeah.
And almost like accidentally stumbled into college. I like to say nobody told me it was supposed to be hard.
Right.
So I kind of just went. But no, we had to, and this was a big moment for me too. We had to write a college entrance essay.
Right.
And the prompt was, what makes you different?
Oh.
And I was like, so first of all, I was like, yeah, I think I got this one.
Yeah, for
Do I
real.
write about my 24 siblings? Do I
Yeah.
write about how I was, and
So many
eventually
options.
wrote about, I was raised in a cult.
Right.
And first of all, I remember I was shaking
Yeah.
calling it a cult.
Yeah, right.
Because the first rule of a cult is you're not a cult.
Mhm.
And it's evil to call it that.
Right.
And I was still, even though I said the brainwashing didn't work, of course it did.
There's still parts
to
of
many,
it. Right.
in many ways.
Yeah.
And, but, I also started to realize that, nothing's black and white, nothing's all good and bad, because I'll never forget, the perfect, American cheerleader who sat next to me, who would, I would help her with her homework and stuff. She just was like, I have nothing to write about, there is nothing that makes me different.
Never had adversity in her life, yeah.
And, eventually we found something, everyone
Sure.
has something.
Yeah.
But I kind of started to see it as, hey, I have an advantage.
Absolutely.
Over, people that have never had anything happen to them
Right.
in their lives.
Right.
And I ended up, winning basically every scholarship I was applied to, and sort of stumbling
That's
my way
awesome.
into college.
Yeah, that's good, though.
Fortunately, my counselors, and I give her so much credit. The school had 4,000 people.
Jeez.
So and there was 4 counselors, so she had
Oh,
1,000
jeez.
students.
Yeah.
And she's still, even the fact that she read my essay
Right.
is mind-boggling
Yeah.
to me. I feel like it went from teacher to counselor to, they literally just applied me to
Yeah.
scholarships, and they were like, hey, we applied you.
Yeah.
And you won. Here you go.
Yeah.
So I ended up getting this package of scholarships, 24K,
Nice.
go to college, find out college costs a lot more than that, even back then. So I'm working 4 jobs, and I'm obsessed with being the best.
Yeah.
Which is also part and parcel of
Right.
being raised that, you are God's
Yeah.
special people,
Yeah, right.
and you always have to be perfect.
Yeah.
So went through college, ended up graduating, valedictorian,
Nice.
et cetera, with
Yeah.
a degree in an honors degree in literature
Nice.
in 2009.
Yeah, right.
In the middle of the recovery, right, of the biggest financial crisis ever.
Right.
And so I end up deciding to commission into the Army.
Yeah.
And at the time, I felt this I can't believe that I did it, that I
Right.
got a college degree.
Yeah.
And I felt this I won the lottery of birth being an American.
Yeah.
You know, I was born to like American immigrant family.
Yeah.
Then, you know, my mom was born in Dallas, but then moved abroad,
Right.
you know, all within this cult. And I just happened to have that American passport. So I was able to come here and do the like American dream. Many of my cult friends did not have that same advantage. And so I kind of felt like at the time I was like, oh, I need to, you know, pay something back to the American dream. I'm going to go join the army, go to war, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Now, as I look at it as a whole and being someone that studies organizations and group culture, you know, I went from a cult, which is one organization, to a school, which is another organization. You know, there's still a structure. And as I was graduating, you know, I don't think I would have had any idea what to do, like how to move forward with my life if I hadn't like found another organization that was going to tell me where to go and what to be.
There were no other options for you then in your mind.
No, and by the way, I've only ever done things this way. It was like, nope, I'm doing this. I'm all in.
That's awesome. Yeah. Pros and cons of doing it that way, but yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, I get to basic training.
Yeah.
And as you know, one of the first things in basic training is when you get off the bus, you've got that big duffel bag of gear you don't even know how to use yet. And you stand there for like 2 or 3 hours, right? Holding this 50-pound duffel bag above your head. They somehow engineer it so it's always raining or super
it has
hot.
To go that way.
You know, and they're just yelling at you. And I literally stood there and said, oh my God, I think I just joined another cult.
Which you were right.
Yes, and not wrong.
Right.
And, you know, it was shocking. Like, I was definitely like, why did I do this with my life? And I had those moments of being
you're stuck at that point.
I escaped, I got away, and now I'm back. But also being able to kind of see basic training for what it was, as basic training is mental programming. Yeah. And people really have heartburn when I say that. But, you know, if you think about it, and you really have to, again, kind of suspend your, you know, what creeps you out about the term cult or about programming or whatever, and just look at it as we're taking human beings whose, you know, gut instinct is to run the opposite direction of a bullet. And we're trying to reprogram them and retrain them to run towards a bullet. And that is, you know, what basic training is designed to do. It is very effective.
Oh, yeah.
And it was very, very similar to many of the things.
But it's designed to break you down as a person and raise you up as a group.
Right, exactly.
And that's it. I mean,
and that's
can't
very
get much
similar
closer
to,
than that.
you know, some team buildings companies will do.
Right.
Or basically just, you know, group organization and how it works.
Yeah.
And, you know, I even... is interesting, the duffel bag story, right? Where people have asked me for the past 18 years now, you know, how did 100,000 people over the course of 50 years like participate in this cult whose, you know, essentially one of their core beliefs is that, you know, pedophilia is part of God's will. Right. And it's, you almost can't, it seems too crazy to people. And people like really truly think that if they were in that situation, they would walk away. Yeah. And what I think the basic training duffel bag story kind of shows is like, I mean, holding a 50-pound duffel bag above your head for 3 hours is physically impossible, no matter who you are. Right. Like, you're going to drop it. You're going to sort of like have to pick it back up, break down. And like, there's a reason they do that. In that moment, people either like can't break or they break. And then once they break, the ones that don't break usually go back and try to like take their life that night, you know, so that they can go home or something. And for all of the rest of us, it's like now you're a part of the group. Yeah. And you are so much less likely to not do what the group requires of you. And so this is my whole book that I'm writing that we'll talk about. But you know, it's a memoir, but the thesis is essentially like human beings will do anything to fit in with a group that they voluntarily are a member of. That's right. You know, or they think that they voluntarily are a member of.
Or especially, and I think that's the big difference is, you know, like you said, when you're in the military, you had a life before that. But in your situation, there was nothing before that. Right. Now, obviously, the military side,
Right.
there was a life, but it, kind of a crazy rendition. But for the people who were standing there with the duffel bag, it's like they knew what it was like to sleep in their own bed. They knew what it was like to grow up with a family and go to holiday and all those kind of different things. That's
yeah,
crazy.
and so this was, basic training was another moment for me of kind of realizing, hey, I have an unfair advantage over everyone because
Totally.
this is normal to me.
Totally
this is
different
similar.
perspective. Yeah.
I grew up playing battle drills for the Antichrist soldiers when I was 7.
Wow. Yeah.
I grew up, sleeping in dorms
Yep.
and being woken up by reveille and standing in lines and getting yelled at,
It's crazy.
constantly never knowing if you were going to get in trouble.
Right.
Like what
Right.
your actions were going to do. All of these exact same things.
Yeah.
So I do think that in many ways, because of where I came from, that made me, on the one hand, a very successful soldier.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, actually able to kind of maybe hang on to my humanity a little bit,
right.
and especially as I went into becoming an intelligence officer, all of a sudden now my job is to study the bad guys
Right.
and to try to get inside their heads. And the first thing you learn in intelligence is again, well, if you hate them, you can't study them.
That's right.
The biggest mistake that the American military makes is assuming that, terrorists in countries that we consider to be backwoods and behind us
Yep.
are stupid.
God, I couldn't agree with that more. Yeah, definitely.
Right? And if
Yeah.
you think that they're subhuman,
Yep.
if you think that they're stupid, if you think that there's no way that mindset is understandable,
Yeah.
then of course you can't predict what they're going to do next.
You're just going to spend all your time underestimating them.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous proposition.
And so for someone like me, who I was no, nothing is beyond what human beings can be trained to sort of believe and follow, which, of course, I had seen firsthand.
Yeah.
And then also, which, is the other part of my article that I've published was, so 9/11, I was kind of seeing both sides of this.
Right.
And then in Afghanistan, when I had, almost my entire patrol team killed one day.
Jeez.
And at their funerals, of course I am. These are my friends. These are my brothers. I'm extremely upset and angry and sad. But even as they're saying all of the rhetoric, right, of they died in service of their country and right side of history, we love to use that phrase. And I could not help myself from thinking about, the terrorist funerals going on, most likely at the same time. And the idea that they, anyone willing to die for an idea believes that they are on the right side of history.
So true.
Of course we believe. And I get criticism for expressing this because all of a sudden this makes me a traitor. Right. But of course I believe that America's on the right side of this war.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Right.
Yeah. Everyone that followed Hitler also believed that they were on the right side of history.
So true. Yeah.
And so in many ways it's not different, right? And American soldiers are, yes, generally honorable people. We love to pay attention to all these values and all these things, but we are also, human beings that are trained to kill other human beings.
That's right.
And we are all willing to die for our beliefs. Yeah. And so we're not dissimilar, right, to the terrorists or to cult members in so many of these ways.
It's all perspective. I mean, that's really what a lot of it comes down to. Is
it really does.
What angle you're looking at.
Yeah. And, so I got to get involved with sort of culture and perspective and breaking barriers during my first deployment to Afghanistan. So I went twice. And on my first deployment, it was in 2011, and it was when they were looking for women to be, sort of dropped in to deliberate ground combat, integrated with these traditionally all-male teams. Yeah. And definitely in no way, shape, or form the first time women have been in combat.
Oh, sure,
right? Women have actually fought in combat in every conflict we've had since the Revolutionary War. So I definitely have to make that very clear. What we were doing wasn't anything more badass than anything that's been done.
Sure.
And most of my patrols were pretty sort of generic.
Just you being there is rare, though. And in my combat experience, I think the only people that we had were females, were medics and intelligence at the S2 shop. But it was rare. It was not something that happened in a combat role very often.
Yeah. And all of a sudden we started seeing that, like women bring different things to the table than men do.
Yeah.
And so, I always describe it as for 236 years at that time of Army, we always said that like women aren't good enough to be men, therefore they have no role here.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden we started to see very quickly like, oh, we don't need women to be men.
Right.
We need them to be women.
That's right.
So I had this experience where we go into this village and the men noticed that the ground was disturbed like 10 seconds after we got off the helicopter. And like, I never would have noticed that sand looked funny.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yep.
I noticed that there were no children.
Yeah.
Like immediately. And
Wow.
so within 30 seconds, we realized before we got to the bomb that there was a bomb in the road. And we were able to kind of like react to that and nobody died.
It's amazing. Yeah.
And it's this idea, and literally within not even a decade now, right? We've seen, obviously there's still the holdouts, there are still the debates. It's always kind of surprising to me because I'm like, oh, I thought we settled that. But there are still people that want to be like, oh, women will never be good enough. But the military as an organization has really seen and really now kind of believes that like, we need people to be able to meet a certain kind of physical standard, but we need women to be women.
Well, people who argue that point, I think, stand exclusively on that side of the argument that just says, well, women categorically can't maintain the physical level required for combat. I mean, we're throwing around 80 pounds of gear. We got to be jumping over fences. Look, there's a lot of guys that can't handle that in combat troops. Right. I mean, I've seen
and that was always one of our arguments,
right.
And I even have started to think about how much of this physical difference is also culturally socialized into us,
100%.
right? Because women, I think once you break barriers, it takes several generations of, so I use like NFL kicker as an example. They're already starting to say that like they think there could easily be a woman who could be a good enough athlete to be a kicker in the NFL. Yeah. However, until it happens, like parents are not going to be pushing their daughters into football. Yeah. And so we don't actually know. There's this really great John Mills quote, who's 18th century or 1800s philosopher. Yeah. And he says, of women's nature, the last word will never be written. And it's a cultural quote because women have been so controlled in every country, in every culture in the world, that it's impossible to know like what we are really capable of, what we really want, what with all else being that's not still influencing us.
That's still going on a pretty extreme level in other parts of the world too. I know. I remember seeing the article with Saudi Arabia finally allowing women to drive, and I'm just like, oh my God.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I always say too that so basically going into Afghanistan, we had to put women in combat because we were fighting an insurgency. So we're fighting the terrorists, not the Afghan people. And so we need the Afghan people to be on our side. Yeah. So we had to respect their culture. Their culture says men can't touch women. And so we had to have women. Yep. And so what that ends up meaning is that going to war in a society that is considered to be 1,000 years developmentally delayed from ours is actually what brought like the U.S. military into the 21st century.
From your experience, because I know I saw it in Iraq. I almost got to go to Afghanistan, but ended up ETSing beforehand. But did you see that to be true in Afghanistan? Did you think socially and culturally that they were 1,000 years behind?
Yeah. I mean, I don't, study societal progression exactly. I mean, I kind of do now. Sure. But I do for sure. Yeah. Like the sociologists that study like where societies, how societies progress. Right. Who, by the way, are basically saying that democracy is just another stop on the progression of society, right? And now we're kind of at the stage where we're moving to the next thing. Right. And to actually think that democracy even is the end-all be-all is very kind of
it's very audacious.
Our time-centric, But yes, I mean, absolutely, right? Like there are, and which is even why it's been so problematic trying to bring democracy to Afghanistan. Yeah. Like they're not ready for it, They
don't understand it.
Same thing in a lot of South American countries, that has been seen as the kind of U.S. as the big democracy is trying to get involved
Totally.
and push that to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it doesn't work in every culture and
Yeah.
where they're at and all of that.
It's just a country's religion. That's all it is.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So then I ended up on my second, I came home. So literally a decade after I escaped this religious cult,
Yeah.
I'm promoted to captain in the Army.
Yeah.
I'm given the, senior intelligence role of a, 800-person battalion.
Wow.
And we come back, and literally my first day back, like I'm put in this new role, and we start train up
Yep.
to go back
Yeah.
in, like a year and a half or something.
Yeah.
As you know, was
Yep.
the op tempo at the time.
That's right.
And so started doing that, like really kind of at this, wonderful place in my life, or what I thought was wonderful place in my life. I've kind of kicked, suicidal ideology and all
Sure.
of this stuff that I had struggled with for 10 years,
that's
trying
gotta
to
be
sort
a
of
big piece of it, right?
unbrainwash myself,
Yeah.
figure out where I fit in the
Yeah.
world, and started to like really find my place. And then during my second deployment, I had, been sharing my background
Sure.
with a mentor of mine, like my senior boss, my battalion commander.
Yeah.
And he was the first person that kind of said to me, what I was used to hearing was like, wow, you're such an amazing American, such a powerful origin story, all this.
Yeah.
But he was the first person that was like, have you ever thought about all of this? Have you ever thought what your history in the cult and in the military and as a leader and as these, patrols and
Right.
all of this stuff, like what value and insights you must have into things like culture and leadership and what I just called organizational behavior.
Right.
And 100% my answer at the time was no, I have no clue.
Yeah, right.
But I've spent about the past 6 years just doing nothing but thinking about that
Yeah,
and
right.
studying about that to the point that, no, today I say, yeah, I 100% have been studying organizational behavior for the
Right.
past 32 years. Cut my teeth in some of the most extreme organizations
No
in
kidding.
the world, right? I mean, I got to spend 15 years embedded with a religious cult studying
It's a
them,
huge deal.
and then
Right.
7 years embedded with the
Right.
U.S. military
It's a really good way
studying
to look
them.
at it. Yeah, you're embedded with a lot of extremists here.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how I
Right.
discuss it these
Yeah.
days, and then I got to go through the process of leaving the military, which was the most similar
Yeah.
to the cult
Yeah.
that I had ever had. And I have so many, thoughts on why, military transition is so broken. And
Yeah.
it all has to kind
Yeah.
of do with
I've
this
experienced
cult
the same.
culture
Yeah.
stuff.
Right.
But yeah, really like got to thinking how all of these things are so connected.
Yeah.
Which essentially is what leads me here to now. Yeah.
Right.
Got a book hopefully next year,
Yeah.
big book deal, hopefully. And so my memoir is called Uncultured, and it is literally, sort of one woman's journey to
Yeah.
leave a cult and leave the military in order to understand how group dynamics and group behaviors work on all of us.
Right.
And how like we are all a product of how we are socialized, and we are all a product of the culture that we're in. And, I think it's such an amazing time in the country right now, in the world right now. Like I call it the culture wars.
Yeah.
We are having these extreme culture wars, these
Yeah.
extreme shifts. And it's a lot of hard conversations, right?
Yeah.
A lot of really difficult, but the more we can understand, I think the way socialization works on us, the
Right.
more we can actively create kind of at least what we think is good, good outcomes, good organizations for.
Well, and self-awareness is such a big deal. I mean, that's really what this all comes down to, is being able to open your eyes and see it.
Yeah.
Identify
Exactly.
it, right? And it's really funny that we talk about this, because when you say that, I think about Dave Chappelle's new special, right? I think about Joe Rogan. I think about all these guys that are talking about it from the humor sense and talking about cancel culture and all these other kinds of things that are going on right now in today's society, which is a very interesting time to be alive, no question. But we are talking about the psychological aspect of it from here, and really understanding, I mean, this really is a good conversation of nature versus nurture.
Yeah. And I actually love comedy as an example, right?
Right.
Of, first of all, socialization, political activism,
Yeah.
all of that. You know, I think it's so funny. It's like women are starting to come out now and be like, I just don't find male comics funny. And men can't like fathom that.
Right.
And they also can't understand that like that is not racism.
Right. Right.
You know, if we were keeping men out of comedy, that would be
Yep.
systemic racism, the
Yep.
way that happened with women.
Right.
Right. And what happened for so long is men who controlled the entire comedy industry didn't find women funny.
Sure.
Well, of course not, because comedy is about life
Yeah.
and you don't have that experience. So you just don't get it.
Right.
You know,
not
my
funny- not
my
funny
husband
to
and I
you.
have to have kind of a deal that like we only watch non-white male comedians together because then we're kind of meeting in the middle.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
Where like, you know, female comics are too intense for him and
Right.
white male comics are too unaware
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah, right,
and
right,
so
right.
we have to like,
There's,
you know,
there's
meet
some
in the
good
middle.
ones on both sides of the table for sure.
Yeah. No, and I think like even you have to, even if something like makes you just you know, you have to still listen to it and you have to still, you know, engage with those ideas.
Absolutely.
Otherwise you have, you know, why was the 2016 election such a big surprise?
Right. Yeah.
And you know, because nobody was thinking of the other side as valid.
Well, and this really gets into a conversation of really just having the ideology that it's okay to hear somebody else's perspective.
Right.
But as a society, I think we're, especially in the U.S., we're so trained that if you don't agree with my ideology, I hate you.
Yep.
And I will fight you.
Yeah.
What?
And it's exactly. And it's so, you know, I think sort of I've described this as one of the things that was very useful in my life was that once I got out of the cult and once I was able to realize like how not normal and how not right everything that I'd ever been taught was, I became a lot more open-minded to any other point of view.
Absolutely.
Because like everything is not normal. And
Right.
so, you know, like, no, there is no normal.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
now
the quote right
I
there.
kind of
There is
joke
no
that I'm
normal.
perpetrating abnormality again with my daughter as I'm raising her in Brazilian Portuguese in America.
Yeah.
You know, but I also think like she's going to know that her experience isn't normal, which means other people's experiences that are different from hers are not wrong or weird.
Right.
They're just different.
Well, and I've met other people that never served, but they were military brats. So their parents were in the military. And, of course, moving every 2 to 3 years is very normal for them. And living overseas or even being born overseas is very normal for them. And so they get introduced to that culture. And I do find those people are a lot more open to looking at differences and differences of opinion because they experienced it. They've seen it.
Yeah.
We've got all these people who are siloed here in the U.S. and they're living in their own little world and they don't really understand what's outside of their little world.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and with American culture specifically, first of all, most people don't realize how sort of xenophobic and isolated we are, right? That like we are super isolated unless you go out of your way to engage with other cultures and other ideas. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And then we also have this perspective of, you know, everyone alive today has been a member of the kind of, you know, most important country in the world.
Right.
And so I've had these very interesting conversations with Americans, especially in the military. And it's almost like you don't understand how other people can love their country and their culture as much as we love our country and our culture.
Yeah.
Because we've always been able to have, which is basically false. We're not really number one on anything anymore, right? But we've always been able to have this fallback of like, oh, America is so amazing.
Right.
You know, and
It's
we
almost
don't
the brink.
tolerate cultural criticism from, I mean, even someone like me that grew up abroad, like it's a very fine line for me to walk, like criticizing American culture.
It's almost our brainwashing, right?
And
that
it
we are
is.
the best in the world.
And in reality, you know, you kind of want the immigrants. Like
Yeah.
they're the ones coming in with the outside perspective,
Yeah.
you know, every time. I think this, you know, I tell my clients this in organizations too. Like every time someone's like, why do you do things that way?
Yeah.
And you want to respond with, well, that's how we've always done it.
Mm-hmm.
That's your opportunity to actually think about why do you do things this way?
Yeah, that's the most dangerous phrase. I've talked to so many people about that, and I hear it all the time. Because I ask that question. I like to question everything.
Yeah.
And so why are we doing it this way? This doesn't make sense to me. Help me understand your mindset, your ideology. What brought you to this point? And they're just like, well, that's how we've always done it. Like, all right, we need to go back and rethink this.
Yeah.
Right? It's straight up. Like, step one, rethink what we're doing here. Wow.
And that's how, I mean, we're seeing it. Like, there's a million examples in industry
There are.
now of
there
like, and or I say all the time, like, if you ask the wrong questions, you
Yeah.
get the wrong answers.
Yeah.
So, one of the examples I love is Uber.
Yeah.
As long as people were asking the question of what do people want transportation,
Right.
you are only having like taxi services and other kinds of services. When I think Uber realized was what people want is to be able to call it on demand, know how much money it's going to cost them, and sense of security, right? You and the driver know each other's names.
That's right.
And fixing that, it's like it wasn't really about transportation.
That's right.
It was about those other things.
That's right.
And fixing that is basically what's making taxi services obsolete.
You're right.
Which,
Absolutely.
by the way, taxi in some form, probably one of the oldest
Right.
city businesses in the world.
Yeah,
right?
and there's Ubers. It's funny you bring that up specifically because I have these conversations on a macro level with a lot of different people about there are Ubers entering every industry in the U.S. right now and maybe even the world, and we're seeing every industry get transformed in ways that you can't say that's how we've done it before anymore. Because you will become obsolete. And entire businesses are having to close their doors because they're not willing to keep their finger on the pulse and move into the new culture of what's coming here.
Blockbuster.
Right?
Right?
Great example.
And I have this other dream. Maybe one of your listeners will like steal this and build this.
Yeah.
But like things like Uber meets ethnic cool restaurant experience almost.
Yeah.
Like Uber. It's so like like I cook Brazilian food.
Right.
So what if like you could sign up to come to my house on a day that's available on my calendar and you and 8 other couples, you know, and you're going to pay $50 for, the ambiance, the food, the music, a local caipirinha drink, and like people
really
could
good
just
idea.
do that wherever, and
it's like the reverse of Uber Eats, right? I'm not going to bring it to you.
Yeah,
you're gonna come to me.
And like all the components exist, right?
Yeah.
You use Calendly or some booking software to just like only make it so when you're available. And I think like
That's
you
a
could
great
get
idea.
so many more cool experiences, and also deal with the issue that with I think a lot of sort of ethnic or multicultural, different cultural restaurants deal with. Again, like if your client is white Americans, we tend to be a little bit scared of things we don't know.
Yeah, of course.
And so walking into a hole in the wall restaurant freaks people out.
Yeah.
So like what's a way to shift? The problem is not that we don't like the food. We love the food. The problem is like how do we shift this to make this a more like comfortable experience for people to get? Because then one thing that we definitely know culturally is once people experience different cultures and different norms and different groups, you start to realize like, oh my God, there's just benefits to everything.
Absolutely.
There's
That's
good
a
and
great
bad
idea.
to everything.
It's a great idea. Somebody out there needs to go make that.
Somebody steal
that's
it.
Perfect. Yeah. Go make it. All right. Wow. What an incredible backstory. I mean, you're right. You have such a unique, and I have an ideology that says adversity is what causes success or can cause success, right? It's being pressed. It's really being forced to do something extreme, right? That really forces you to say, hey, I wasn't afraid of this. I had to go through it, and here I am, right? That experience is amazing. So let's talk about what brought you to the Puget Sound.
Yeah. So when I decided to leave the military, one of the reasons I decided to leave the military was because on that second deployment, I described, I met my husband, and we literally kind of like got to know each other while deployed to a war zone.
That's always fun. Yeah.
Got to a really cool little cultural story. I was telling him that I loved salsa dancing.
Sure.
Which was like actually a trick that I would use with like white American men to be like, because I look like this pretty blonde girl next door, but I'm really not,
Right.
I'm not, if that's what you're looking for, which is fine, that's not me.
Sure.
I'm the person that's always pushing out of comfort zones,
That's right.
wants to walk in those hole-in-the-wall restaurants.
Yep.
And so I said to him, like, oh, I love salsa dancing. And I'm so used to sort of white American men being like,
Ooh.
oh, I don't dance. This man, this is our second date. He just looks at me and he says, I can build you a dance floor.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I was immediately, you've met my husband. He's awesome.
Right.
I was immediately like, oh my God, I'm going to marry this guy.
That's a hell of a
right?
pickup
Like second
line.
date. Yeah. It worked out.
I'm going to write that one down.
For him.
Oh, you like to dance? I'll build you a dance floor.
But and he did, by the way. He built the dance floor for our wedding. But it was
amazing.
about, again, this concept of like, oh, he's not going to be scared.
Right.
To try new things,
Yeah.
And that's what I'm looking for. Like, I'm not looking for someone that has had the same life as
That's
me
right.
or has had the same experiences.
Yeah.
Just someone that's going to be open-minded to
That's
it.
right. That's right.
So we get back, we decide to, get married, have a baby, all of this very quickly, get out of the Army. And he is joining at the time was joining the Special Operations Helicopter Unit.
Right.
And we moved out here to Seattle.
Gotcha.
And so what that turned into for me, culturally, is, I was the trained expert on the enemy.
Right.
And I did my whole career with helicopters.
Yeah.
So I am a government-trained expert on all of the people trying to kill my husband.
You're right.
And for the past 4 years, he just got back from his last combat deployment. But for the last 4 years, he's been almost 50% of the time, overseas. And I... Not only all of a sudden I'm introduced to this whole military spouse culture, which let me tell you is
Let's talk
not
about culture. Yeah.
a wonderful culture that we've created.
Oh boy.
I'm kind of a little bit happy to get out of
Yeah.
military spouse culture next year when he retires. But so we ended up moving here, and I did the normal veteran thing, and I said, what does my resume say that I do?
Yeah.
What's the civilian version of that? There's not a whole bunch of civilian companies hiring people to hunt terrorists.
Yep.
So
Which is unfortunate because I would have joined that company.
Right,
in a
right.
heartbeat.
And so, and when they do, they're all in Washington, D.C. We're
That's
here
right.
in the other Washington,
Yeah.
and so I had to get creative and say like, okay, well, corporate security.
Yep.
And I did transition supposedly very well, right?
Sure.
I had a 6-figure job offer 4 months before I even left the Army.
That's impressive. Nice.
Yeah, it was great. And took me a few years to realize like I absolutely freaking hated it, right? Like the locking doors and the checking files, that was the boring part of my job in the military.
Yeah.
But then I got out and did the same thing.
That's all you
And that's
did.
like so many of us do that, right? And it literally took multiple people being like, wait, you were an Army captain, you're trilingual, like why do you work here?
Right.
For me to finally really like ask myself, what do I want to be? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
And, I'm now getting to this point where I'm like, if I had, all the money in the world, right?
Yep.
I would just write books and speak on stages.
Yeah.
And have these, my goal is to be this national level or international level kind of thought leader on culture.
You've got a huge
And
background to talk about.
Yes,
it.
thank you. And just have these conversations
Right.
for the rest of my life. And of course, get paid to do it.
You're right.
And
It's always a
so
plus.
for the past 3 years, I've been trying so many different things.
Right.
And I'm finding now, my very good
Kind
niche.
of what works. Yeah.
And, but yeah, so that's how we ended up in the Puget Sound.
Nice.
And I also just have to say, I had never felt like an American until I came here.
Wow.
And I finally felt like I fit here.
Yeah.
And because I was in Texas,
Right.
and then I was in the South, and then I was, like I've been to like New York and all these places, but I was always like, oh my God, I'm just always going to be an outsider.
Yeah.
And I finally came here, and it was kind of like, oh, these are my people.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still very, it's very white. It's very like, we could use a lot more, I think, like mixing and some cool things that are happening
Of course.
throughout the whole country right now. But yeah, I really do like it here.
Yeah.
And then getting involved in the, entrepreneurship community, has just been, I went from 3 years ago, like hating my job and being like, oh God, I should be able to hang by my thumbs for this much money. To now where, I'm still figuring out where I'm going to make all my money.
Right.
But, I've had people ask me, like, do you get to just have, like, what we're doing right now? Like, do you get to just have these amazing conversations about topics that you're passionate about?
Yeah.
Like, is this common for you? Because it's rare for me. And people will say that to me. And I'm like, actually, it is.
Do it every day.
Now that I've figured out, like,
Right.
exactly what I want to do and exactly what I love to do, that's one of the cool things about I mean, culture, like everything still comes back to culture, right?
Right.
But like once you can figure out, like even for a personal level, like what your values are, what you want to be, what you want to do, then you can make it happen.
That was one of my questions from before, because obviously being indoctrinated from such an incredibly young age, and all the way back from the beginning until you finally left it. And I'm sure, like you said, there's threads of that still stayed that are very hard to get rid of because they're so ingrained in who you are and in your DNA, so to speak. When did you really find your cruising altitude? When you really felt like, I know who I am, I know where I'm going, I know what I want to do, and I'm just going to go execute. Was there a moment in your life where you felt that really hit?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of what is happening right now.
Nice. Okay.
Yep.
That's exciting.
And I would say, like,
really
I always
exciting.
had, like, pieces of it.
Sure.
Right? Like,
Sure.
Even when I was 15, I was like, what do you want to be? International.
Yeah.
And what did that mean at the time? Lawyer. And so I pursued that.
Sure.
And then in the military, I was like trying to be a foreign area officer.
Yeah.
And then when I got into corporate security, I was like, how can I use my languages to make me international?
Totally.
And there was like that component of it,
Yeah.
and then the culture piece and just realizing like, so when I left the military, I was like, I'm really good at being an expert, right? Like I have a lot of skills to just like good memory. Like I speak well, like I love just deep diving into a topic and being the expert advisor to like the boss.
Right.
Right. And so that's, where I'm getting to now. It's like, okay, I'm going to write books. I'm going to speak on big stages, which I'm one of those weird people that like really enjoys being on stage
Right.
with the microphone.
There's no shaking and being nervous. Right.
Yeah. And there's still a lot of like, every time someone tells me they're not good at public speaking, I just look at them and I say, well, nobody's good at anything they don't practice, and
Bingo.
there's a lot of, you can do a lot to become a good public speaker, but then there are people that are just, I'm like in another life, I would have been a singer or an actress.
Totally.
Which is, again, like that's how we were socialized, right? Like I was a child actor on cult television. I was singing and busking on streets my whole life.
Crazy.
And honestly, my daughter is like this too. She's so funny. She sees me like preparing for a talk and she goes and gets my laser pointer and she walks around. She goes, hi, I'm Lorelei Jane Young. Let me tell you about teams.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And, she's just
a little
I'm
mini
like,
me walking around.
Yeah. I'm like,
I
oh
love
God,
it.
we gotta, put her in dance and put her in all this stuff to
we
like
need to direct you.
develop those.
Right.
But yeah, and I think what has been really cool is like finding it and being like, okay, now that I know, like now I know this, now I'm going to go do this for the rest of my life. And then from a business perspective, that has allowed me that level of focus, right? So when I told when I signed with my agent, I was like, look, you and my co-writer and like this team that I've built, like you guys are the ones that know how to do this. So anything you tell me, I will do.
Yep.
But my end goal is to be on stages and be on panels and be on Ellen talking about culture.
Absolutely.
Right? It is not to be, talking about how do we end like childhood sexual assault.
Right.
Which could easily be a topic from my book, right? It could be twisted in that direction.
Of course.
And of course, that is a super valid thing. That's a thing that I care about. That is, but it's just like that's not my purpose.
Yeah.
When I really got into speaking, I was, everyone was pushing me in the direction of motivational speaking.
Of course.
Which again is not what I want to do. Like I'm a corporate business speaker.
Yep.
And I, as I'm sure the listeners have kind of heard from our discussion, it's like, yes, I have these amazing stories.
Right.
But my purpose, my purpose of my memoir is not to be like, oh, you're this, I survived this, so can you.
Right.
My purpose is to be like, hey, the more we all pay attention to how we are all socialized and how we are all brainwashed and how groups work on us, the more consciously we can create cultures that work for everyone.
And I totally view it as self-awareness is a tool, right?
Yeah.
You can have it in the toolbox. If it's not used, it doesn't matter, right? And I really do feel like that's a good flag to plant in the ground to say, hey, we need to be aware of what's going on around us. We need to be able to pull this out and look at ourselves, right? And look at the organizations we're a part of and be able to identify good culture, bad culture, how to build culture, all
Yeah.
those things. Yeah.
And then also, when you have like that purpose, right? And this
Yeah.
is true for individuals, this is true for companies, like this is culture, right?
Yeah.
When it's one-on-one, I describe it as like you're building a culture around yourself
Yeah.
that you want. But having that like higher level purpose, you're never going to achieve it. It's never going to be done, but that's where
That's
you
right.
want to go.
Yep.
And it also allows you to deal with the fact that we actually don't know like what path we're going to take,
Right.
So about a year ago, I was like, okay, I want to do this culture thing forever.
Yeah.
And get paid to do it.
Yeah.
What am I going to do? And I tried different things. And my next idea was going back to get a PhD in organizational psychology.
Sure.
Which is still, I think, like a goal that I have for myself in the future.
Yeah.
But along the way, I was also like, I want to publish this book. And I was going through that process. And that just happens to be like happening right now.
Yeah, right. We're in
But
it.
it's the same outcome, like, well, what was the purpose of the PhD? It wasn't just so that I could be, Dr. Daniella.
Right.
It was so that I could have a platform to get paid to talk about culture.
Makes sense.
And if I have a best-selling book,
that
I will have that platform
That
to
helps.
pay. Same platform, right? And so I do think that, like, you can have multiple levels of getting to the same goal.
100%.
Yeah. And just be able to be like, oh, is this, I'm launching my podcast next year.
Nice.
And it's Culture Hacking with Daniella Mestyanek Young.
That's
and
fantastic.
it's talking about culture, which
Yeah.
is what I want to be doing.
Yeah.
And I've even be able to shift a little bit from like, it doesn't have to be so strictly corporate culture. Like,
Right.
yes, I want to do corporate culture specifically, but, culture is everywhere. And
Yeah.
the same things that impact, a company impact a country and impact peoples and families. And so it's just like, once you see it everywhere.
So that actually kind of walks right into my next question is, for somebody who looks through the lens every day of culture and looking at different cultures, since you've been here in the Pacific Northwest and the Puget Sound, have you seen any interesting cultural phenomenons in this area specifically?
Yeah. I mean, so first of all, one of the things that really stood out to me the first time I came over here to visit, like to, sign for my job, was like, it's super active.
Yeah.
Everyone is outside running and walking, like teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just don't see that in the South.
Yeah.
That's just not. And I think some of it is the weather.
Sure.
There are the most, like, I'm a big runner, I'm a big marathon runner, and there are the most days of the year that you can run here. There's like 2 months in the summer where it's too hot by 8 or 9 to go for a run. Like the rest of the year, you can run outside. You just either need warm clothes or cool clothes. And like, you can't do that in Texas.
Yeah.
Like if you want to go for a 15-mile run in Texas, you're getting up at 5 a.m. to run before the sun comes up.
Yeah, that's right.
So that is interesting. But then it's also like, so there's always almost like a reason, right? An operational reason for any kind of cultural thing, right? So here it comes from the weather.
Yeah.
The weather's so nice. But then it is 100% a cultural thing about the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I get invited to go hiking all the time. I freaking hate hiking. Right? Like, I will run forever, but I do not like to walk.
Yeah.
But that's a huge thing here.
It is. Totally.
Eating very, very broad kinds of food.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's a huge thing here, which I really, really enjoy.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciate. You can find everything.
The food's amazing here. Yeah.
That you want to eat. I do think it is interesting to me because I think of Seattle as so diverse. And then every time I'm like in like DC or New York and I'm like, no, Washington's really kind of like white and Asian.
Yeah.
And so it's something for me now that I'm trying to sort of actively go out of my way to, one of the things I teach people is building community, It's like the same as a culture. Like, you can just accidentally be friends with who you end up being friends with, or you can like on purpose be like, I need these kinds of friends.
Yeah.
And because I spend all my time thinking about it, I mean, legitimately, when Taylor Swift's You Need to Calm Down song came out, right? And it was kind of like either a big deal for the LGBT community or imposter appropriation, all that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I want to talk to people about this. And I realized like, oh, I don't really have a lot of close friends
Yeah.
in the LGBTQ community that I can call and ask these questions to.
Right.
Okay, well, there's a hole, and not because I want to answer my questions, but like there's a
Right.
hole in my group of friends, like in my community. So now I can go out and be like, okay, I need to make more friends in this community so I can understand their lives and their worlds and how we all interact together.
100%. Yeah.
You know, and I think like the Pacific Northwest is a wonderful place
Yeah.
for all of this. I think in many, many ways we are leading the country in kind of being on the right side of history and creating the cultures that work for everyone.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah.
we are at least actively, there's a lot of people actively working on that.
Absolutely.
So I love it. Yeah.
It's something that is becoming more of a conversation. I was listening to another podcast from Gary Vee not too long ago talking about how he hired his chief heart officer.
Yep.
And how that position is designed specifically around culture. It's not HR, because HR is very multifaceted where, you know, yes, they're there for the employee, but they're really there for the employer, right? This was more about how do we build the heart of the company. And I think that's genius. I think that's absolutely amazing. So let's talk a little bit about how one would identify, because, you know, like you said, culture is not just company. Culture can be nonprofit organization. It could be in your family. It could be you individually. It could be the company you work for, the company you run. How do you advise people to identify what is good and what is bad culture, assuming they're not at the top, right? Somebody who's within an organization. How does somebody identify what are the categories of good or bad culture, good facets of it?
Yeah. So the first thing I always want people to look at is like, before you even get into like good or bad, is like, do you have a plan? Right? And so business leaders, like, hey, James, do you care about your business making money?
Of course.
And do you have a business plan?
Yes.
Okay. Do you care about culture?
Of course.
Every business owner says yes.
Yeah, right.
And then I say, do you have a culture plan? Like a literal written culture plan.
Yep.
And they're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, right.
So, by the way, I've created a culture plan, right? Which is like sort of military planning, operations meets
I love that.
all of this culture stuff.
Yeah.
Because, as I like to say, you know, one of my favorite philosophers, the Cheshire Cat, who says, if you don't know where you're going, then it doesn't matter what route you take.
That's right. I love that.
And so I have this process where, you know, the way, like, it's great to say we care about culture and it's great to say that, like, we're going to do these values and we're going to implement them.
Yeah.
But how do you actually turn that? That is strategic level. That is high level. And you need that. You need to start there.
Yeah.
But how do you actually turn that to the point where you are making those decisions based on your values? And so I'll give you a concrete example with my family. You know, so one of our values is, of course, family. But it's, you know, I went through these vision exercises where it's like when you're 80, close your eyes and go through all your senses, right? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you smelling? And one of my things is like, okay, I want to still be best friends with my daughter. You know, I want to talk to her every day on the phone in Portuguese, which is great. Now, in those 50 years, how am I going to make that happen?
Yeah.
And what does that mean today? What that means today, as she's almost 4, is I am not away from home more than 2 nights a week. Like I'm home for bedtime 2 nights a week.
Yep.
Or 5 nights a week.
Yeah.
Right? So that I'm actively building that relationship with her.
Makes
sense. The Portuguese.
Yep.
For it to still be that we still speak Portuguese to each other when she's an adult too.
Yeah.
Like, what do I need to do to make that happen?
Yeah.
Right? Like, I need to be very, very active and guard against my relationship with her in Portuguese. So I can't just like switch to English at a kid's birthday party because it makes other people more comfortable.
Or that,
you know, and be very aware that like the culture, because we live in an English speaking country, like the culture is going to try to crush that language out, not by anyone doing anything bad, just because like it's easier.
Yep.
And so that's kind of the process that I do with business leaders, right? It's like, okay, so here's your overall mission, right? Your purpose, your values. And then how do you actually put that into play to where you are making tactical decisions based on values, right? You're hiring, firing, and promoting based on values.
Yeah.
you are setting up metrics to measure how you're doing culture, right? Because I also really truly believe that like importance is not what the leader says it is, it's the reporting you require.
Yeah.
And the way that organizational behavior works is we prioritize the things we have to report on, right?
And companies are notorious for following vanity metrics when it comes to key performance indicators. I see it a lot. And
right.
Shoot, in the beginning of my entrepreneurship career, I did the same thing. Like, hey, I care about how many likes we got on that post.
Yeah. And I mean, someone who's, I, as an intelligence officer, I'm essentially a trained, data scientist.
Yeah, that's right.
And you can make data look like support whatever you want it to support.
So true.
Right? It's all about how I teach veterans this with their resume.
Yeah.
I'm like, if the numbers make you look good, then say, you managed 50 people. Mm-hmm. If the numbers don't make you look good, then just say you managed large, people.
A large group.
People,
people.
like you managed a group of people and like maybe that's just 6.
Right.
But, like you can make numbers.
Right.
Look however you want to do.
Yeah.
And that's an even important thing to understand about business, right? Is like you can make things seem how you want them to seem.
Yeah.
And as we all know in the small business world, there's a lot of people who spend a lot of time making their business seem more successful than it really is.
100%.
And, like that definitely happens with culture.
Yeah.
And so that's my kind of like, okay, my first step.
Yep.
And then to actually answer the question about sort of good and bad. So there's 2 parts to this. One is I always say you can't spell culture without cult. Okay. And basically everything that you're doing to build a good culture has a flip side.
Yeah.
Right. And like nobody creates a cult on purpose.
Right.
Nobody creates a non-functional organization on purpose.
Yeah.
But you also don't just like create a good culture just by being a good person.
That's right.
Right. So that's where the plan comes in. But then it's like, so group identity is great. Right? For example, like everyone wants this kind of strong group identity, this strong team.
Yeah.
But groupthink is the flip side of group identity.
Right.
Right? And so what are your checkpoints? Right? So this is like one of the parts of my plan. It's like you have to have a plan and then you have to have checkpoints, which is, another military concept of like, how are you checking yourself all along the way to make sure that you're not getting off track?
Yeah.
Because anytime you do any kind of cultural initiative, right, you're guessing.
Yeah.
You don't know how it's going to work out.
Right.
And there's so many other things at play that you can't like really know how it's going to work out. So if you just fire and forget, it's, like let's just buy ping pong tables.
Right.
And you don't know like why you're doing that, like how it ties in to this whole plan. And then the other thing is I think I really like people to get away from this concept of like good and bad.
Sure.
Like it just needs to be honest and real for your culture.
Yeah.
And I compare this to dating all the time as like, well, you don't need everyone.
Yeah.
You just need the right one.
That's right.
Like your culture needs to fit the people that you want to work for you. It doesn't need to fit everyone.
Yeah.
Amazon clearly doesn't need to offer their employees work-life balance.
Right.
Because they don't, and they get plenty of employees. And work-life balance is one of my favorite ones because everyone says they care about it.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, okay, so let me ask you, a metrics question.
Right.
How often are you giving people stuff on Friday that's due on Monday?
Yep.
Because if you're doing that, you don't care about work-life balance.
Yeah.
Which is okay. If that's what, your people want. There are plenty of people that want to work hard, play hard, and don't necessarily need, millennials are kind of redefining this whole work-life balance, right?
Totally.
It's like, if I love what I'm doing, then I don't really need work-life balance.
Yeah, that's right.
But you need to know, like, why. And so I think, like, people get very wrapped around, like, love's a great value, right? Well, let me tell you about how love was twisted into a terrible thing when I grew up, right? Or like money is evil,
right?
Bill Gates does a lot of good with money,
and
so I always just say like, hey, values are gray. Culture is gray. Yeah. It's like nothing's black and white.
It's a really good way
to
put it.
And the more we think of things in black and white, the harder it is to understand.
Yeah.
So that's why I say things like you can't spell culture without cult. And people get angry and they want to like argue with that, but they're like,
right.
oh, no, you're literally right.
Right.
And those words come from the same root word, of course,
Yeah.
for a reason. So
Right. So for somebody who's, I've experienced a lot of negative culture and good culture on both sides of the table and in so many different areas, whether I'm working on a nonprofit project or I'm working for somebody else as a W-2 employee or I'm trying to build my own culture. What do you think? Let's assume there's a plan. What do you think could be done if I'm not in charge and I'm identifying bad culture? Now, obviously, I can leave, right? I don't have to be there in most cases. Obviously, the military is a little bit different. There are some, regulations. So, I mean, this is, a kind of a broad question, but what would you advise somebody to do if they just don't see the kind of culture that they want? Is there anything that could be done to whisper in somebody's ear or recommend or drive from the front? Is there anything they can do to try and build the culture that they would like to see within their organization?
absolutely. I think, it can actually be very effective to have, lower level people and individuals kind of like influencing and affecting the culture.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that people can do is, first of all, just get like self-aware, like you were saying, like understand like why this thing bothers you. Like if you just know that your work culture sucks, but you don't understand why it sucks,
That's step one.
then and then it's hard to go in and change it.
Right.
But if you understand, like what you are looking for and then what the company has, and that way you can either help build it or you can leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also just like hard conversations are hard. I have to remind people about this a lot.
Yeah.
Like hard conversations are not easy.
Yeah.
Everyone says, let's have hard conversations, but they're hard.
Nobody wants to open that door.
And so you kind of, I think if you want to influence, sort of grassroots change, like you have to take that initiative and you have to make yourself like the culture person.
Right.
And you can be the one that is always bringing it up,
right.
In every context that you can.
Sometimes that's what it takes.
Yes, people will be annoyed. Yes, people will roll their eyes.
Sure.
A lot of my friends are so tired of hearing me mention the word culture at parties or Thanksgiving. But, like you're the person always looking out for it, then you're going to be able to have an effect. And actually a lot of like big companies are starting to do this now. Just identify individuals already on their team that are just into culture and then just like empowering them to go out and, be the change they want to see.
Absolutely.
Which is also, again, like this is another military concept, right? It's like, well, don't just come and complain, come with a solution, right? And so it's like, you have to really understand, like, oh, I don't like it when he talks to me this way because it, makes me feel this way. It shows that there's no lack of trust, etc. Yeah. And then, like, that also helps you to be able to have those conversations and not have it sound like an attack.
Absolutely. And I've been in situations where I've brought up culture issues. And I've said, you know what? I think we're going down a bad path right now. I'd like to recommend that we audit our culture, right? And I think that's a way to come that's very non-aggressive, to say, hey, I think there's something here that needs to be looked at. Can we do a global audit? Can we look at it from top to bottom and just see what's there, right? Maybe we don't have any culture. Maybe we don't have the right culture. Either way, I think this is something that needs to be looked at. And I think that really is a soft way to bring it up to leadership, at least, because there are a lot of entrepreneurs and C-suite level people who don't see ROI in culture yet. They always see the negative, like, hey, our turnover is super high right now. Maybe it's just the employee, or maybe they've been feeling that something's wrong, but they don't know what it is. And all of a sudden they've got this guy from the lower level coming up going, hey, can we take a look at this? And then in their mind, they're like, oh, okay, why don't we look at it and just see what it is? I think that's a really good way to do it.
Yep, I agree.
So obviously you're in a lot of different things and you have a very specific path that you're trying to go down now. What kind of a culture would you want to build? What's important to you when it comes to culture, having been in so many different kinds?
Yeah, so I loved this question, and I'll actually probably do this in two parts too, So I think that, and, I'm actively trying to build this culture. I would say hopefully one day I will get there, I think money is not an issue and everything's amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I think your culture at whatever group or whatever organization is like, everybody is obsessed with understanding, the socialization and the way that culture works. And everyone is constantly trying to become more aware of how their life experiences have influenced them. I think it's one of these things that I'm starting to notice. There's almost like hopefully it's not unbridgeable, but there's almost like a divide between people that are paying attention to culture and how we've all kind of been involved in creating cultures where humans are not treated equally at all yet. Yeah. And what we can do to change that. And then there's like whole groups of other people that just don't want to see it, don't care, who truly believe that if they don't see a problem, for example, every time I hear a white person say there's no such thing as white privilege, I'm like, how would you know? You're white.
Exactly.
Men tell us all the time that they don't think sexism is a problem.
Right.
And it's like, well, how would you know? Like, it hasn't been.
Yeah.
Every time people are like, oh, God, Daniella just has a chip on her shoulder about being a woman.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, because people have been taking chunks out of my shoulder for being a woman for my
right.
whole life.
Right.
And so kind of this, like, if you have a chip on your shoulder, why?
Yeah.
If somebody else is acting this way, why? Like, all of one demographic group didn't get together and just decide to make up this story about the cultural effects on them.
Some conspiracy in the
right?
background.
Like, I wish we could be that organized, but no, And so, I think really a culture where everyone talks about this and everyone understands that, like, you'd be like, hey, James, like, you benefit from white male privilege.
Right.
I am, by definition, then disadvantaged as a woman.
Yeah.
It's not your fault, but how do we fix this?
Yeah.
How do we, and it really starts with people being open to talking about it, realizing that it's not an attack.
Right.
But it is true.
Right. Well, that's how those kind of comments are usually taken.
Right.
Is you're attacking me. Therefore, your ideology is different than mine. Therefore I
you're
hate
wrong.
you, and I'm not going to agree with you. Nobody's willing to have even the conversation, which is a big part of the problem, I feel like.
Yeah, and then I also, have thought about just for fun. So, I want to create a world for me where I only work like 20 to 30 hours a week.
Yeah.
I only do the things I absolutely love.
Yep.
And I make tons of money.
Yeah.
And so I just recently started thinking about, like, well, what if the entire organization I build, the Daniella Mestyanek Young culture hacking brand, which is eventually going to have, hopefully 100 people working for me.
Absolutely.
Doing leadership schools and doing all this stuff. Like, what if I could create a world where everyone gets to have that?
Totally.
Right? So where, like, say you come to work for me and first of all, your scope of work is only going to be 20 hours a week.
Yeah.
There's going to be almost like a business plan for what you bring
I love that.
to the organization.
Yeah.
And then for an additional, 10 to 20 hours a week, you're free to use, and by the way, this is all remote,
right.
And I'm only hiring people that love doing this job, And the next like 10 hours a week, you get to use like non-expendable company resources to just like innovate, right? To just come up with new things.
I love that.
And then like once a quarter or every 6 months or however, it logistically works out, you get to actually pitch what your new ideas has brought to the organization.
Yeah.
And you get to pitch how much additional money you should get.
I love it.
Based on that.
Yeah.
And I think, what we're seeing about culture and what we're seeing about when people love what they do and what we're seeing about innovation, if you really believe it, like in theory, there's no reason why I can't build an organization where everybody's making tons of money, only doing the things that they love and being constantly innovative, right?
I absolutely love that. I'm such a huge proponent of innovation from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Now, I love to innovate from the top. Don't get me wrong, but my R&D teams are from the bottom. right? I want ideas coming from the people who actually have their hands in the dirt of whatever it is that they're doing. I love that.
And it's also that whole thing we talked about earlier with like you don't have a different perspective that you don't have.
Right.
And so,
Right.
you know, like, of course I can't. This is obviously why we all have guests on our podcast, right? Because it's like, well, I could talk all day about culture. I do. And I write about it and all this stuff. But like on my podcast, I interview other guests to tell me their life story and their culture journey and their insights.
That's right.
And I'm like, I'm literally just crowdsourcing all of my own learning, right? Because like
it's genius though,
yeah,
really.
you get to do it in this cool way.
Yeah.
And if people, you know, care about what they're doing and the money is going to be tied to it and they get to, you know, have those flexible lives that they want to lead, like I don't see any reason why it can't work.
No, me either.
Now I just gotta build it.
Now it's execute.
So yeah, that's my dream culture.
Build the plan and execute. Prioritize and execute, as Jocko would always say.
I literally picture like in the future, and there's already a couple people, you know, that I've known from the past for like, you know, say my book does really well or something, and I just get to be like, hey, you know, like my one mentor be like, I want you to come run my leadership school.
Yeah.
Tell me what you're gonna do. Tell me how much I should pay you.
Yep.
And then go do it.
Let's make it so.
And then just like back brief me. You know? And I think like that's the best way to have like everyone in the right job for them, doing what they love to do and just being happy.
We share similar dreams. For me, that's I feel like if I hit that benchmark, that's how I know that I made it. If I can just bring people that I know can execute a plan, and I can just say, I want to do this. I know you're the right guy for the job. I know you're the right person to have on the bus and in that specific seat. What's it going to take, right? To be able to be at that level and to be able to direct traffic like that. Very powerful. Very powerful. Very exciting. Oh my gosh. It's like, you know, when people get asked, what would you do if you won the lotto? Right? You won the lottery. You're a multi-millionaire. What would you do? And the first thing that most people go to is, well, I would buy a boat and I would buy a house and I would do this and I would do that and I would go travel and I would do all those things. I've been asked that question. I'm like, oh man, I would hire so many people. Yeah. I would go build my empire 50 times bigger, you know.
Yeah.
I'm always thinking about what we can give back. And, you know, it's not that things are bad. You know, I'm sure boats are awesome, you know, but.
Well, but it's also like that's not – it's kind of like value versus things, you know? And it's like – so actually my lottery is such a good example. Like my husband and I every once in a while will buy a lottery ticket just for the purpose of sitting around for an evening, drinking wine and talking about like what would you do?
Right.
And the last time we bought it, it was like what? It was over $1 billion.
I remember that. Yeah.
And, you know, my husband's kind of doing this. Well, I would buy this. And it's like, babe, with $1 billion, like you're just going to buy whatever you want.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
We can, it's almost not even fun to talk about oh, it was just like, no, whatever we want to buy.
Right.
And so then it became more fun where I was like, what kind of businesses would I invest in? What kind of things would I do?
Shark Tank Daniella.
What kind of, what kind of, no, I mean, I want to one day like raise millions of dollars and then find women that I think can be the next thought leaders.
Yes.
But like you need development, you need time, you need resources.
Yeah.
I've only been able to do this journey that I've been on because my husband was still working full time.
Yeah.
But, you know, what if I could find the next Oprah, you know, and pay her $100,000 a year to go through this journey and be on this program and read these books and do all the stuff, you know, talk to all the people, have all the coffees.
That's right.
And develop.
Yeah.
You know, I almost want to like build the process for becoming a thought leader.
That's what it is.
And getting
right?
paid to do it.
That's what it is. Yeah. That's the one thing that we lack right now, or we would have those things. But the standard operating procedure, right? I talk about that a lot with the military background, but I apply that to business just as much.
Yeah.
But that's the problem is all these great ideas don't have that procedure. That's what we're lacking. We're lacking the SOP. We're lacking the people that have that passion. I think they're there. We just haven't connected the two together, right?
Yeah, and people talk about it. You know, people talk about it in like the traditional book publishing a lot.
Yeah.
And I think I told you this, that somebody said to me, you know, a year ago, like, Daniella, just self-publish your book because getting a traditional book deal is like winning the lottery.
Sure.
And because I've been an entrepreneur and in business and consulting these business leaders, I'm like, I bet there's a process.
Yeah.
Just like 9 out of 10 businesses fail doesn't mean you're
That's
just
right.
throwing darts at
That's
the wall, right?
Yep.
The more you perfect your process.
Yeah.
And so sure enough, and it's interesting because now I've got this great team working on this book.
Yep.
And, you can make data look like whatever
That's
you want, right?
That's
So it
right.
can just look like I got lucky, I pitched an article, I got that article, it got published, it got the attention of an agent.
Yeah.
I got to skip the whole process of finding an agent, and now I'm hopefully selling a book deal in January.
That's so exciting.
And even my partner who's in publishing, like, she'll be like, yeah, but it doesn't ever work that way.
Right.
And I'm like, well, I mean, I planned that
Right.
a year ago.
Right.
Of course you can't guarantee, right?
Sure.
And you still don't know. There's always the lottery-esque, is everything going to go perfect
It's
and
there.
make it the next big thing? Or is it just going to be like moderately successful, but, it's happening. It's much, much closer. I'm much closer now to being a traditionally published author than I was a year ago. Because I set off and I did this kind of very, very procedurally.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, and for me, that's the fun part about the market.
Mm-hmm.
If it sucks, nobody's going to read it. If it's amazing, everyone's going to read it, right? The market will decide. And all you can do is push out the best story and the best product that you possibly can. And, Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL, former Navy SEAL, talked about, because he has multiple books now, and he started his first one with a publishing company. And then he had all these other ideas that they wanted, but couldn't execute on the timeline that they wanted. So he went out and created his own publishing company. And it's amazing now and super successful. But he started in the same mentality of, no, I'm just going to do it the traditional way, which worked.
Yeah.
That's a killer
and that's
book. But
basically exactly my plan.
Yeah.
Is like, look, like this book, now I'm at the point where people are like, oh, well, you don't know. And I'm like, well, but I mean, I know how good this book is shaping up to be.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just kind of like, all right, you'll see, we will all see.
Yeah, that's
Because,
right.
of course,
That's
I can't guarantee. But, I think we're creating a really great, taking these very unique origin stories, but making it, showing why it matters to literally anyone that's in any kind of group, which is 100% of successful humans.
Yeah,
right? And so, in theory, of course, we're like any business, we're defining the niche market for the book. But in theory, runaway bestsellers are because they apply to everyone.
Absolutely.
Taylor Swift has a target market, but everyone in the world listens to every kind of person, right?
Okay.
Because you don't get those numbers, right? You don't get billions of sales.
Huge numbers.
Without. I remember someone talking about this with the rapper, I want to say 50 Cent or something. And it was he's selling 50 million albums. That means everyone in America, every demographic group is listening to 50 Cent.
Yeah, that's right.
Of course, there's still tends to be more target. I'm sure I listen to more Taylor Swift than you do.
I'm sure.
But,
I'm quite positive of that.
You can probably also name some of her songs,
one or two.
Yeah. So anyways, that's
pretty fun.
Yeah, that's the process. And then in the future, once I have the platform and I'm the well-known author, then I will just create my own
then it really
publishing
accelerates.
imprint and then do all these business books that I want to do.
I love the idea. Yeah.
I already know I want to do a book called Combat Barbie, which is just sharing the stories of so many women.
Yeah.
And I think when you put them all together, because even when you read my book, it's going to be easy to be like, oh, that toxic culture she's talking that was just her. That was just that one experience.
Oh, no.
But when you see it back to back to back to back to back, and Combat Barbie, by the way, came from a snide comment that someone made to me once. But I just feel like it's descriptive.
That's going to be the irony right there.
Yeah, I'm going to do it all.
That's a great idea. I love that. So obviously you're out of the military now. You've done TED Talks and you've written articles and you're starting to get yourself out there. What's next for Daniella? What's next for you? What's on the horizon? Obviously the book, right?
Yeah. So, all right. So January, exciting. January, February, we're going to kind of start, hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully a book and hopefully, I don't know. I almost want to be careful how I talk about it.
Sure.
But, definitely, you can go on my website right now and sign up for the email list, which is just going to tell you, if I get a book deal, you won't get spammed, but people can just follow when this is going to come out. I'm also probably going to publish a book of essays on culture, more of my story and stuff too, but then essays that I've done on culture and leadership and change management, which is, I think, what I'm calling transition now.
Yeah, right.
And that is I'm going to put it in Spanish and Portuguese also, because those are, audiences that I want to appeal to and want to speak to. In February, I'm going to Brazil with my family for 2 months. And I am actually going to give some talks to the Brazilian military. Oh, wow. Specifically to the first group of special operations women graduating from the 3-year school that they send them to, by the way, because that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go talk to like their military academy in Portuguese.
Wow.
Which has been like a big kind of goal of mine, right? As I've raised my daughter in my second language and gotten like really, really much better at it. To be like, I'm going to go actually speak to
it's a big deal.
To Portuguese speakers in Portuguese and Spanish speakers in Spanish. And, most international speakers are only speaking in English.
Right.
And I can speak to half of the world in their language.
That's so huge.
And so, I'm kind of hoping that doing the Brazil stuff will also kind of help me launch into a different level. Brazilians almost never get to meet Americans that speak Portuguese. Like Spanish speakers meet a lot of Americans that speak Spanish, but for Brazil, it's very rare. So I'm super excited about that. And then the same time, January, February is going to launch my podcast, Culture Hacking with Daniella Mestyanek Young, where I'm literally just interviewing the most diverse people I can to talk about culture.
It's fantastic.
And super exciting, and hope to turn that into a book, too, at the end of the year.
Totally.
Right? Like telling everyone these stories. So, books, speaking, and I'm really, really hoping that I get to just get on big stages and speak to people about culture and the value that can bring to their organizations.
That's the cool but ironic thing about culture in general, because you would think culture, or at least the conversation around cultures, would be so specific to those independent cultures. But culture itself and the framework of it is universal.
Yeah.
It's the culture of human beings, not just their specific niche.
Yeah, and it's and this is the thing that I've realized, and this is why the like origin story for me is so important, because there were so many similarities between an extreme religious cult and the U.S. military. And then I've seen it in Fortune 500 company that I worked at, and then I saw it at a nonprofit that I worked at, and then like you start to see, not saying good or bad, but just I started to realize that like, this is just organizational psychology. This is just behavior. Human beings operate differently in groups than we do individually.
100%.
And that, of course, like, little cultural things will be different, but that's just context. But that's not like
that's not
how
framework.
Organizational behavior works.
Yep.
And that I don't think is, culturally influenced at all. I just think it's like, this is how this works. This is how like human beings are driven to pursue community and brotherhood and all of these things that for example, cults do really well, right? And that's why, and organizations that do that really well have no problem finding people,
absolutely,
and talent and stuff to work for them. And so it's like, okay, so how do you do that? How do you take these facts that we know about how organizations work, right? And so the thesis of my book that I mentioned, like that human beings will all do almost anything to fit in with the group around them. It's a concept called group norms. And so how do you become very organizationally aware of what your group norms are, so that you are actively knowing how to, not manipulate people, but manipulate those elements in your group. And I think the military is a great example, because people are like, well, the American Army is such a wonderful organization. And I'm like, well, if we strip away everything, armies are groups of humans trained to kill other humans. As officers in the American Army, we spend a lot of our time trying to ensure that the U.S. military is a force for good.
Yeah.
And that we have all these checkpoints and protections in place, and that we care about values, and that we motivate our troops, and all of those things.
Yeah.
And you can easily look at some other militaries that are obviously not forces for good.
Right.
And then, not to mention, of course, there's tons of problematic things in our military and in our culture, and no organization's ever going to be perfect, and that shouldn't be what you're striving for. But the more aware we are, the more you see it with the sort of toxic sexual harassment, rape culture in the military of these discussions, and people are kind of like, oh, this is exhausting, or the Me Too movement, right? And it's like, well, you have to do this. Like, you have to talk about it. You have to have these discussions in order to change it. And those elements are everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, where do we go from here with Me Too? Like, that's going to apply to every culture in the world. It's going to be, like, the actual tactics might be a little bit different.
Totally.
But, like, how you build it, how you grow, how you change culture, all of those things, I think, are replicable.
That truly is where it starts, though, having the brutal conversation at the beginning that nobody wants to have. Nobody wants to rip the Band-Aid off and admit that we have to talk about culture.
Yeah.
But it absolutely needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
If people could get past that one thing of just not being willing or not wanting to have the conversation, I think it really comes down to being afraid. They're afraid of having to change or having to modify their position in that culture.
And that, actually leads very nicely into what is my unique value proposition, right? Whether you're hiring me to keynote at your event or to come and consult in your company or to buy the books, it's like, I can help you expose the culture you have to get the culture, then build the culture that you want.
That's huge.
Because if you're not super aware of the culture that you have.
Some people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And
we see this. I see this at a relationship level with me and my husband. We have a lot of conversations about equality because it's so important for the good, right men to realize. Men have to change the culture for women. But you guys don't know what it's like for us. So we have to have these conversations. We have to do this, and we have to really, really expose. Here's what the culture is for women. We got to believe each other, and then we can start, changing it all. And it's
such a good.
It's such an exciting time because this is all happening right now.
It is. We're in motion.
Really cool.
We're in motion. Well, let's end this chat with the question of the day. Let you ask a question to our audience. You can use it as a focus group to gain insight, or just do something fun. Right? Totally up to you. So, question of the day. Fire away.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm going with fun.
Nice.
But still applicable.
Okay.
Okay, so if you or your listeners could, for one day, just, transform into any other demographic group or cultural group, member of a different, social or identity group that you could never be, would you do it?
Yeah.
One, and then which one would you be?
That's really good. That's a really good question. All right. Well, I'm going to think about that. Everybody can put their answer in the comments below. And we're also going to put Daniella's contact information in the description below. So if you want to reach out to Daniella, ask her any questions, or just engage further in this conversation, I think it's going to be super valuable. We'll put all of your socials and your website where you can go sign up for the book, or at least finding out when the book is going to be released and where to find it. Daniella, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think there was so much valuable conversation, and culture is everywhere, right? It's being self-aware to see it. I think that's huge. Do you have any parting remarks before we turn this thing off?
No, I think that one was great, right? Culture is everywhere. And the more you see it, the more you will see it. And the good part is it's fascinating. So you never get bored. It's never done.
That's true.
There's never anything that culture doesn't impact.
All right.
The more we know, the more we can change.
I love it.
Model exactly what we want.
Yeah, 100%. All right.
Thank you so much for having me on today. This was a very cool conversation.
This was really fun. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. You've been watching the Puget Sound Underground podcast with James and Daniella. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.